I trusted my husband to be there for me until he chose work over my health. Now I'm trying to decide if our marriage can survive this betrayal. So, listen to this. My husband and I have been married for 3 years. We've got a 1-year-old daughter together. Up until last week, I thought he was someone I could always count on. Turns out, I was wrong. It started when I wasn't feeling great. Like, really not great. Fatigued, nauseous, just plain unwell. Then one morning, I woke up with a fever, chills, and this weird feeling like something big was wrong. I was so weak I couldn't even get out of bed. Taking care of our baby? Forget it. So I called my husband at work. Hey, I said, I need you to come home. He promised he'd be there soon. But an hour went by. Then 2. Text after text came through, just finishing up something. Stuck in traffic. On my way, but I gotta stop for gas. Meanwhile, I'm getting worse. Fever higher, dizziness worse, everything harder. Finally, I told him, this is serious. You need to come now, he said, almost there. But something didn't feel right. So I texted one of his coworkers, someone we both know well. The reply hit me like a punch, he hasn't left yet. Still here. I froze. Fury mixed with fear. What if something happened to me? Who would take care of our daughter? I called our neighbor, an older lady who's super kind. She showed up fast, helped me get dressed, and drove me straight to the hospital. Turns out, I had a bad UTI that turned into a kidney infection. My heart rate was sky high, and the doctors told me I was close to septic shock. If I'd waited much longer. Well, let's not go there. 2 hours later, while I lay shaking in that hospital bed, hooked up to N4, guess who finally showed up? Yep, him. And what did he do? Tried to explain himself. I didn't realize it was that bad, he said. I was just trying to wrap things up at work. Yeah, sure. The thing is, he lied to me. Over and over. While I was fighting to stay conscious back home. If it weren't for our neighbor, I don't know where I'd be right now. Now, I feel betrayed. Like, deeply betrayed. How can I trust someone who ignored me in a life or death moment? What does this say about our marriage? About our future? About keeping our daughter safe if something happens again? I honestly don't know what to do next. Would you trust your partner after something like this? So, after that hospital trip, things got weird between me and my husband. Like, really weird. The betrayal didn't just fade away because he brought flowers or apologized a bunch of times. I mean, yeah, he said sorry. Over and over. But actions speak louder than words, right? And his actions screamed unreliable to me. The first few days after I came home from the hospital were tense. He acted all guilty, hovering around me like I might explode if he left the room. But here's the thing, I didn't want him hovering. I wanted him to own up to what happened and figure out how we could fix it. Instead, he kept saying stuff like, I was stressed at work or I didn't think it was that serious. Yeah, well, turns out it was that serious. If I'd waited much longer, I could have ended up in septic shock. Or worse. Our daughter added another layer of complexity. She's only 1 year old, so she doesn't understand why mommy isn't herself or why daddy keeps looking sad. Seeing her interact with both of us made me realize how important trust is, not just for me and him but also for our family as a whole. What kind of example are we setting for her if we can't even rely on each other? One night, about a week after everything went down, we sat down to talk. Or at least, I tried to start a conversation. He seemed defensive right off the bat, which didn't help. Why do you keep bringing this up? He asked. It's over now. You're fine. Fine? I wasn't fine. Not by a long shot. I told him exactly that. I said, being fine isn't the point. The point is whether I can count on you when I need you most. That shut him up for a minute. Then he started talking about how much pressure he's been under at work lately. His boss has been breathing down his neck, deadlines have been tight, and apparently, there's some big project coming up that's making him anxious. Now, don't get me wrong. I get stress. Everyone gets stressed. But stress doesn't excuse lying or ignoring someone who needs you. So I asked him straight up, if work is more important than your wife and kid, why bother being married? He looked shocked, like he hadn't thought about it that way before. Maybe he hadn't. A lot of people think marriage means putting your partner first, no matter what. But clearly, he needed a reminder of that. We talked for hours that night, going back and forth about expectations, priorities, and where things went wrong. By the end, neither of us had any answers, but at least we were having the conversation. Fast forward a couple of weeks, and things weren't magically better, but they weren't totally falling apart either. He started making small changes. For example, instead of disappearing into work mode every evening, he'd spend time playing with our daughter or helping me cook dinner. Little things, sure, but they mattered. It showed me he was trying, even if he still had a long way to go. Then something unexpected happened. One Saturday afternoon, I got a call from my mom. She sounded worried. Turns out, she'd fallen while gardening and twisted her ankle pretty badly. She lives alone, so she needed someone to come over and check on her. Naturally, I offered to go. But then I remembered what happened last time I needed help, and how quickly my husband disappeared when I needed him most. So I hesitated. To my surprise, he stepped up this time. Without me even asking, he said, "Go see your mom. I'll stay here with our daughter." I stared at him for a second, half expecting him to change his mind. But he didn't. He meant it. I grabbed my keys and headed out, feeling a mix of relief and skepticism. Would he actually follow through, or would history repeat itself? When I got home later that evening, everything was fine. Our daughter was asleep, and he was cleaning up the kitchen. "How'd it go with your mom?" he asked casually, like it was no big deal. I told him she was okay, just bruised and sore. Then I admitted something I hadn't planned to say: "Thanks for watching her today." That meant a lot to me. For once, he didn't brush it off or make excuses. He just nodded and said, "Yeah, well, you do the same for me." And maybe he's right. Maybe part of rebuilding trust is giving him chances to prove himself, not just assuming the worst based on past mistakes. But here's the thing: rebuilding trust takes time. Just because he showed up for my mom doesn't mean everything's fixed. There's still a lingering doubt in the back of my mind. What happens next time I need him? Will he step up again, or will he disappear like last time? These questions weigh heavy, especially since we have a little girl depending on us to set a good example. A few days ago, I found myself thinking about the future. Not just next month or next year, but years down the road. When our daughter grows up, will she remember us as parents who supported each other, or will she see cracks in our relationship that never fully healed? That thought scares me. Because if I can't trust my husband completely, if I always wonder whether he'll show up when it matters, how can I expect her to grow up believing in relationships? On the flip side, though, I know relationships aren't perfect. No couple goes through life without bumps along the way. My parents fought sometimes when I was growing up, but they always worked things out. They taught me that love isn't about avoiding conflict, it's about facing it together. Is that possible for me and my husband? Can we rebuild what we lost, or is the damage too deep? Yesterday, I decided to try something different. Instead of focusing on the bad stuff, the lies, the missed calls, the fear, I focused on the good moments. Like the way he plays peekaboo with our daughter until she giggles uncontrollably. Or how he makes coffee exactly the way I like it without me having to ask. Those little gestures remind me why I fell in love with him in the first place. They give me hope that maybe, just maybe, we can find our way back to each other. Of course, none of this guarantees anything. Trust isn't built overnight, and forgiveness doesn't happen with a single apology. But I think we're moving in the right direction. Slowly, cautiously, we're figuring out how to be a team again. And honestly, that's all I can ask for right now. So, things have been complicated since my last update. My husband and I are still working through this whole trust thing, but honestly, it feels like 2 steps forward, 1 step back most days. You know how it is. Relationships aren't easy, especially when you've hit a rough patch as big as the one we're dealing with. The other day, something happened that made me pause and think. We were at the park with our daughter, just enjoying a nice afternoon. She was running around, laughing like only a toddler can, and for a moment, everything felt normal. Then she tripped and scraped her knee. She cried, of course, and ran straight to me. I picked her up, hugged her tight, and kissed her boo-boo like any parent would. But then I noticed something. My husband didn't move from where he was sitting on the bench. He didn't even get up to check if she was okay. Just stayed there, watching us from a distance. At first, I thought maybe he figured I had it under control. And yeah, I did. But later, when we got home, I couldn't stop thinking about it. Was he testing me? Seeing if I'd react? Or was it just another sign that he doesn't always step up when someone needs him? I asked him about it that evening, and his response? "I figured you had it handled." Sure, maybe he did. But isn't being there part of the deal too? Not just assuming your partner will take care of everything? That night, we ended up talking about it. Again. It seems like these conversations happen more often than not lately. He admitted that sometimes he freezes in situations like that because he doesn't know what to do. "What am I supposed to say or do?" he asked. Honestly, I didn't have an answer right away. I mean, how do you explain something so basic? Like showing up for the people you love? But after thinking about it, I told him, you don't have to fix everything. Sometimes just being present is enough. He seemed to think about that for a while. The next day, we went grocery shopping together. Nothing special, just a trip to the store. But halfway through, I realized I forgot my wallet at home. Classic me. So I turned to him and said, "Guess we're walking back." Instead of groaning or complaining, he just shrugged and said, "No problem. Let's go." On the walk back, he carried all the bags without saying a word. Simple gesture, sure, but it meant a lot. It reminded me that small actions can speak louder than words. But here's the thing, rebuilding trust isn't just about those little moments. It's also about facing the bigger ones head on. A couple of weeks ago, I found out some news that shook me up. My job might be relocating soon, which means we'd have to decide whether to move or stay put. Big decision, right? When I told him, he didn't respond right away. Just sat there quietly, staring into space. Finally, he said, "We'll figure it out." That wasn't exactly the reaction I was hoping for. I wanted reassurance, support, anything to show he understood how huge this was. Later that night, though, he surprised me. He pulled out a notebook and started jotting down pros and cons for moving versus staying. "Let's talk this through," he said. "Whatever happens, we'll handle it together." Hearing him say that gave me a tiny bit of hope. Maybe he's learning to step up. Not just physically, but emotionally too. Of course, progress isn't linear. There are still times when I catch myself wondering if I can really count on him. Like last weekend, when I came down with another round of nausea. Not as bad as before, but bad enough that taking care of our daughter felt overwhelming. I texted him during his lunch break, asking if he could come home early. His reply? "Can't leave work right now. Things are busy." Sigh. Same old pattern. Except this time, instead of getting angry, I decided to give him the benefit of the doubt. Maybe he really couldn't leave. Or maybe he just needed a reminder. So I called him later that evening and said, "Hey, I know work has been crazy, but I need you to remember that home matters too. Even if you can't drop everything, let me know you're thinking of me." He paused for a second, then said, "You're right. I'll try harder." And you know what? He did. The next morning, he woke up earlier than usual to help me get ready for the day. Little things, sure, but they add up. They make me wonder if maybe, just maybe, he's starting to understand what it means to truly show up. Still, there's no denying the cracks in our relationship. Some days, I worry they'll never fully heal. What if I'm stuck forever wondering if he'll choose work over me again? What if history repeats itself when it matters most? These thoughts weigh heavy, especially since we have a child depending on us to set a good example. How do I teach her about trust and reliability if I struggle with those things myself? But here's the kicker, life isn't perfect. No relationship is. My parents fought sometimes when I was growing up, but they always worked things out. They taught me that love isn't about avoiding conflict, it's about facing it together. Is that possible for me and my husband? Can we rebuild what we lost, or is the damage too deep? Yesterday, I caught myself reflecting on why I fell in love with him in the first place. Sure, he's flawed. Aren't we all? But he's also kind, funny, and capable of surprising me in the best ways. Like the time he fixed our leaky faucet without complaining, or the way he makes our daughter laugh until she snorts milk out of her nose. Those little moments remind me why I chose him, even when it feels hard to remember. In the end, I guess all I can do is keep trying. Keep having the tough conversations, keep giving him chances to prove himself, and keep reminding myself that relationships take work. It's not glamorous or easy, but maybe that's the point. Love isn't about perfection, it's about showing up, even when it's messy. So, here we are. The end of this chapter. Or at least, that's how it feels right now. A lot has happened since my last update, and honestly, I'm not sure where to start. But maybe the best place is with what changed. A few weeks ago, something shifted between me and my husband. Not overnight, but gradually. Like the way the seasons change without you really noticing until one day you wake up and it's suddenly autumn. That's how it felt. We weren't perfect. Far from it. But there was a new rhythm to things. A sense that maybe, just maybe, we could figure this out together. It started small. Really small. Like when he began remembering little details about my day without me having to spell them out. How'd that meeting go? He'd ask randomly, even though I hadn't mentioned it yet. Or when he remembered to text me during lunch to check if I needed anything from the store on his way home. Simple stuff, sure, but those moments added up. They reminded me that trust isn't built in grand gestures, it's made from tiny, consistent actions. Then came the big moment. Remember how I told you about my job possibly relocating? Well, turns out it wasn't a possibility anymore. It was happening. My company announced they were moving offices to another city. At first, I panicked. How would we handle this? Could we afford 2 separate households if he stayed behind? What about our daughter? Would she adjust to a new school, new friends, all the changes? When I broke the news to him, I braced myself for resistance. For once, though, he surprised me. Instead of shutting down or getting defensive, he said, "Let's talk this through." And he meant it. Over the next few days, we sat down together and hashed out every detail. He researched housing costs in the new city, looked into potential jobs nearby, and even asked our daughter what she thought about moving. Her answer: Will there be ice cream shops? Watching him take charge like that was huge. It wasn't about solving everything instantly, it was about showing up and being part of the solution. But here's the twist: as much as he stepped up, so did I. Somewhere along the way, I realized I'd been holding back too. Maybe not intentionally, but definitely subconsciously. I'd been waiting for him to fix things, to make the first move, to prove himself worthy of my trust again. But relationships don't work that way. They're give and take, not one-sided demands. So I decided to meet him halfway. One evening, after our daughter went to bed, I sat down with him and said, "I get it. You messed up before. Big time. But guess what? So have I. I've been expecting you to earn back my trust without doing much to help rebuild it myself. That's not fair." He looked at me like he didn't know what to say, which was fine because I wasn't done. "From now on," I continued, "let's stop pointing fingers and start working together. Deal?" He nodded, and for the first time in months, I saw relief in his eyes. Not guilt or defensiveness, but actual relief. Like he'd been carrying this weight alone, and finally someone else was helping carry it. Fast forward to today, and things aren't perfect. They never will be. There are still arguments, misunderstandings, and moments where I wonder if we're making the right choices. But here's the thing: those moments don't define us anymore. What defines us is how we handle them. Do we shut each other out, or do we lean in? Do we blame, or do we problem solve? Lately, more often than not, we choose the latter. The move ended up being a good thing. For both of us. Finding a new place together gave us a chance to rebuild on common ground. Packing boxes, unpacking furniture, setting up the nursery, it all became these little milestones that reminded us why we chose each other in the first place. Sure, there were fights over whose turn it was to assemble the crib, but hey, teamwork makes the dream work, right? Our daughter adjusted surprisingly well to the change. She loves her new room, her new playground, and yes, the new ice cream shop down the street. Watching her adapt made me realize something important: kids pick up on everything. If we want her to grow up believing in love, trust, and commitment, we need to show her what those things look like. Not just talk about them, but live them. Of course, none of this guarantees happily ever after. Relationships require constant effort, and life throws curveballs when you least expect them. But I feel differently now. More hopeful, less anxious. Not because everything's fixed, but because I see progress. Real, tangible progress. Progress that reminds me why I fell in love with him in the first place, and why I still choose him, flaws and all. There's one last thing I want to share, and it's probably the most important. Through all of this, I learned something about myself. Trust isn't just about believing someone won't let you down, it's also about believing in yourself enough to take risks, forgive mistakes, and keep trying even when it's hard. That lesson applies to more than just marriage. It applies to friendships, careers, dreams, everything. So yeah, that's where we are. Still figuring it out, still navigating the ups and downs, still learning how to be better versions of ourselves. And honestly, that's okay. Because sometimes, the journey matters more than the destination.